Hey everyone, and welcome to the Technocratic podcast. Today our guest is Gabriella Poczo, a longtime CTO. Gabriella has worked in a number of leadership positions over the years, including time at American Express, Skype, T-Mobile, and one of my favorite companies, Sun Microsystems. I met Gabriella recently and was immediately impressed by her depth of knowledge and experience in all things tech leadership. I'm excited to have you on the show, and welcome to the podcast, Gabriella.
Hey, thank you, Bobby. It's wonderful to be here.
Awesome.
I'm going to just, before we jump in, I do want to do a little shout out, to LA and all the people that have been affected by the fires, and everybody should kind of try to donate and do whatever we can. I used to live there.
Yeah.
Probably the little house I lived in is gone. So my heart's a little broken this week, and I want to do a shout out for that.
Absolutely.
But thank you for having me. And again, my name is Gabriella. I'm actually a Canadian. I'm sure people will figure that out really quickly. The out and about. I went to TMU in Toronto, where I have a master's in engineering, a minor in computer science. And I moved to the United States in 1992, the promise of Silicon Valley.
That's right.
And I mean, who could not take that as a little, kind of low life Canadian engineer? Why wouldn't you do that? That was the dream come true. And I ended up working for Sun Microsystems for 13 years. And truly, I look back at my time at Sun as what shaped me as both a leader and as a technology person. And, I remember taking my first negotiating class as an engineer there.
They gave you a negotiating class.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Negotiating, believe it or not.
That's so cool.
And finance for non-financial people. So
Perfect.
I learned how to, read a balance sheet and understand budgets and whatever. And then, and also selling your ideas. That was another kind of really interesting. And I draw on that little training course all the time.
I'm sure.
About, how to sell your ideas. And I think it has a lot to do with leadership, because, setting the agenda and developing fellowship, you're selling, you're raising money for a startup, you're selling. So I look back to really those 3-4 things from Sun as a non-technical training as being really instrumental in shaping me, and being able to, selling your ideas is taking technology and being able to translate it into terms that business people understand and that actually solve business problems, not just have cool technology. Because I also, I worked for digital equipment that launched the first 64-bit chip back in the late 80s, early 90s. And everybody was like, why do I need a 64-bit chip? And, now, then for me, it opened my eyes. I'm like, wow, I can put a whole database into memory. Like, that's pretty cool.
That is pretty
Imagine how fast that can be. So I look back at those kind of non-technical training, but the things that shaped me, Sun shaped, was just doing it right the first time, automation, always innovating, always pressing, Sun let me experiment. It didn't matter that, my patent, it didn't matter that people looked at me like I was talking, like I was from Mars, but eventually, people come around, and that's what innovation is. Anybody on the bleeding edge, you're often looked at that, wow, people don't understand, and they kind of think you're cuckoo a bit. But doing it right the first time, automating, test automation in particular, and doing it right the first time is you release it once, you don't go back and fix it 100 times.
Right.
So Sun really, really drilled in some of the key foundational elements of software development lifecycle. I was very fortunate enough to what is now Jenkins started out as something called Hudson.
Oh, really?
And,
That's Sun. Wow.
Yeah, it formed the basis of CI/CD and the importance of open source, and even using those methodologies when you're in a big company, because as you grow, there's multiple teams, and sometimes those teams might as well be working for different companies.
Right.
So how do you develop software collaboratively? How do you improve and extend software together collaboratively, and all the basics of open source test automation, proper SDLC, documentation, and sharing, and so Sun was a big influence. And actually, getting ready to chat with you, I thought that's probably the longest time I've been at one company. It was 14 years.
I've heard a lot of people have the same story as you. That same kind of like, what a great culture, look what they taught me, and they took it with them for the rest of their careers. What do you think it was about Sun's culture? How did they develop such an awesome culture where so much great work happened?
I think they let you experiment. I think there was not this rigid, you shall do this. My team, that started playing around with, I was an executive by then, but playing around with test automation, they just didn't want to, they wanted the results back faster, and they wanted to be able to, they didn't want to be, testing it manually.
Right.
So, back then they would, hit the button and go home, and 12 hours later, the test would be done, not instantaneously like now. But I think, that wasn't in their scope. So they were, one of the other things I tell my teams is automating yourself out of a job. So, we had the freedom to experiment. And even mobile, J2ME, Java came around. Java came around to make stuff easy.
That's right.
It literally, it was there to make stuff easy. Test automation is there to make stuff easy. And J2ME was a micro edition, we saw the mobile devices coming. And, most of the big customers were already like the Singulars and the Southwest Bells, that merged to be, AT&T, but, maybe not merged to be AT&T, but the old mobile carriers were already customers of Sun.
Right.
So I wrote the first mobile app, weather location-based app, in 2000. So we were allowed to experiment and allowed to be curious. And, I thought about the things that make a great CTO is, curiosity and courage. Because, when you set an agenda and you set a vision, you're being curious. And you're being courageous at the same time, because you're trying to get 3, 4, 5, 600 people, even 2 people to follow
believe in you. Yeah.
So sometimes you have to be super courageous too.
That's a really good one.
But I think experimenting, having the freedom to do that.
Yeah.
And I think
did that come from the top down?
Yes.
And in leadership, that was, I guess they were encouraging that kind of experimentation and all that.
Yes. Yeah, they were. It was, and I do think having my tech career kind of quote unquote mature in Southern California or in, the Bay Area,
Silicon Valley.
I was surrounded by amazing people. I landed there when, Apple had just fired Steve Jobs, and, he had founded Next, and, they were coming in to do demonstrations.
Ooh,
and I'm
cool.
sitting there, I got there early, and I'm sitting at the back, and I'm watching this guy crawling under the table, plugging in stuff. And later, my colleague sits down beside me, and just the way he spoke, the way Steve spoke, I said to him, who's that guy? And he goes, that's Steve Jobs. And I'm like, oh my God, now I explain. I understand.
Was he that magnetic and charming in person?
Yes. And even Andy Rubin, I know Andy Rubin, he was with Danger, he was very innovative, and he so you're surrounded by all this environment, and then you just take it to work.
Yeah. I have a question to you. Use a word, innovative. I was actually writing about this just earlier today. I was writing about what happens in a company when they lose their innovation mojo. So it's year 1, year 2, they're innovating like crazy. That continues maybe into year 5. When you maybe acquire the company in year 10 or something, they're just in maintenance mode. They haven't invented anything new for years. And if a company like that wants to get their innovation back, How should they do that in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I get pulled into a lot of stuff like that. American Express was like that. Even startups. And I'm going to go back to what I earlier said: do it right the first time and have proper SDLC. I think even the smallest companies kind of go off that tangent, and then they create tech debt.
Right.
And also, the CTO that's maybe, not as courageous as they should be with the founders and the CEO and the board. They want speed, they want faster, but being able to explain, being able to demonstrate with data and show that, even though we go faster, if we're fixing stuff in the field, we're not. So the building of tech debt is what gets you into the mundane maintenance mode, business as usual.
Right.
I think one of the basics is a charisma, a leader that has charisma, because you can't develop fellowship. And then a leader that's really interested and curious on how do you break down that? How do you shift the R&D spend away from maintenance to innovation? And that's all looking at things that are more from an architecture enterprise. I used to say, look at things with an engineering mindset, but it needs to be from the enterprise level. So every time I'm going to build a payment platform, is there something I can reuse, even though that person is in a different company, so that I don't have to, recreate it. And then you've got all these resources that are doing the same thing, and so it becomes this kind of messy hairball, if I can use a Scott McNeely word, that you can't innovate because you've got too much tech debt. You've got people that are that's all they're doing. The morale's down. The worst thing you can do is create a group over here that's going to do just new stuff, because then they don't like each other. Right. So it becomes a holistic view on embracing the entire workplace culture to look at how did we get here, and doing a few experiments, looking for duplication as the best thing ever across multiple teams, and trying to create, like what I did, there were 9 different payment platforms.
Yeah, that's right.
And, we were stuck in this, we don't have time to do this and we don't have time to do that. Well, I had done a few little bits of innovation around optimizing how software is developed, freed up a little bit of resources. Product was a little behind. I took those resources and in 3 months wrote a prototype for a payment platform. And then slowly all the other platforms started using it. And then all of a sudden people are like, how come you have time to do all this stuff? I'm like, because I eliminated all this duplication. At the same time, everybody's happier. They're using more modern tools on this new thing. So I think it's a hard problem to solve, and you have to go to the root cause. You can't just turn a switch one day and say, I am now going to innovate more. There needs to be a commitment from the top down that is about, it's okay to go slower, to go faster. And you wrap it in data, and you communicate, and you look for areas that avoid duplication. I call it the red and orange zone. You want your engineers are in the red zone, which is that mundane junk. You want to get them. I use orange because orange is an exciting color, a lot of energy. You want to get them into the orange zone, and by eliminating duplication, giving them an opportunity to do more interesting tools, making test automation important, doing it right the first time, and supporting them in doing that. That's how you start crawling out of that morale kind of non-innovative dump.
Yeah.
And the CTO, it's a very difficult role, because you're managing. You're trying to raise the spirit and focus the work on good stuff, but you also have to provide the air cover. You're like the umbrella.
Absolutely.
You're the umbrella, and you have to manage expectations ahead. And this is where, I wrote that little playbook, the framework to go faster, is that it's not, in the last 15 years, we've got a lot of really good CTOs. They're very technical. But from a culture perspective and a managing expectation perspective, they don't know how to do that. And I in my playbook, it's about embracing the entire workplace culture to create a responsible, autonomous, and accountable culture. And when you have that, then people will do the extra. People will go home and innovate, and people will I had guys doing this payment platform on their own time sometimes, at midnight.
Right.
And it's because if you don't, then they're just going to be stuck in the doldrums. I mean, one of the first things I did was, with Amex is the first place I didn't own product. So when I started looking at what the engineers are working on, the sprint would start. Or the sprint planning would start, and it would be like this dump truck of stuff that would show up that the engineers had never seen, one-line stories, they've never seen it. And, if they didn't have a leader that was supportive to say, that's too much, and you're going to start looking at stuff a little bit ahead of time, and if it's not ready, you can say no to product, that allows them to start saying no, and then they start doing better estimates. Because if the dump truck just shows up every 2 weeks, they're just going to go, well, nobody's supporting me. I'm just going to say yes, and I'm going to do the best I can. So you never meet any of the delivery timelines.
Exactly.
So it starts with that. I started with that at Amex, and really putting pressure on the product folks to have better. Have better stories, put more thought into it. Because I often, one of my other famous lines is, engineering is the single most expensive cost center in any organization.
Right.
So you want to be working on the right things at the right time. And if product people are just churning out stuff without doing the research, without wrapping it in KPIs, without providing, non-functional tests for engineers, the engineers, they're always going to be, overloaded.
Running behind and missing deadlines. Now you eventually made your way to Skype, which was literally one of the biggest chat applications in the whole world. It was up there with like AOL, IM and all of that. Well, tell us about that. What was that experience?
Well, that was actually like now, 16 years ago. Relationships matter. The CTO of Sun, or one of the group CTOs of Sun, was the CTO at Skype, and I was kept in touch with him, and he's like, well, I need somebody to do mobile, and by then I was like, everybody knew me for mobile, and so I built the mobile team from scratch, and that again as a CTO taught me many things, because you're juggling these huge technological advances in mobile. It was iPhone 4. We lasted 90 minutes of battery. So we were trying to solve battery life. We were trying to solve for video. Imagine video on a 4 megabyte phone where you're juggling not only the video quality, but the audio quality, and you're always doing trade-offs. So, and then you're juggling the bandwidth irregularities. So there were these unbelievably difficult technology challenges to overcome. And then you layer, I talked earlier about being the umbrella. Then you layer that, we got to get it out by the end of the year. Mobile video out by the end of the year, but don't forget the battery has to last more than 90 minutes, but we got to get it out by the end of the year. Got to get it out, by the end of the year. Wow. The new CEO showed up about a year after I was there. And the first time I met him in our quarterly ops reviews, he had flown over from the United States. Tony Bates, he was a Cisco guy, and he had ripped out of the magazine and the airplane. And it was one of our I forget the name of the company now, but he goes, when am I going to get video? And so there was this tremendous pressure from above and then the private equity. So managing, I think I was like this rookie at managing stakeholders, because at Sun you're only managing, your own company. But, the private equity team, they were under, later I learned they want out in three years. They don't want they don't want a company on their books for longer than 3 years. They want to make money, get out. So I began to understand the incredible pressures of that. The new CEO, the original founders from Skype were still in the equation.
Okay.
That's something that I think I shared with you that is, I don't think you see that often, where two people found a company and sell it to eBay for a couple billion. And then when there were contractual things that, Meg Whitman had left out, and the founders ended up owning 14% of them, or ended up still owning the intellectual property. So when the private equity came in to buy Skype, they were like, well, they were suing eBay for $100 million. So the private equity gave back the founders 14% of Skype. So do the math. When Skype got bought by Microsoft, 14% of $8 billion is like another couple B, and out of the exact same technology.
Right. That's amazing.
So, I had those people were still in the equation, because they're like, well, why can't we be on RIM? Why can't we be on the BlackBerry? I got people that put it on the BlackBerry. So it was just this, it was like skipping being a line manager and becoming CTO.
Right to the
I had never in my wildest dreams, I had no experience.
How did you handle the pressure?
How did I deal with the pressure?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Because that's a lot right
I
there.
rode my bike a lot.
Nice.
I was dating a man in Germany and I used to use Munich as kind of a hop off, and he was a cyclist. And even in the winter, I had a full on winter suit. So on the weekends, we'd ride like a couple hundred miles.
Oh my God.
A couple hundred kilometers a weekend. Yeah. So I think physical stuff
helped a lot.
Was a lot. And I studied martial arts too. So meditation is always super important.
Yeah.
But so Skype was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of pressure. It was a lot of pressure. And, I look back at it now, and and this might be a good segue to AI, but I feel a lot of responsibility for how we dealt with instant messaging and social media and mobile. Because I also launched the first Android handset in 2008. Okay. And really, the mobile device is the tool for social media. Right. And instant messaging, it completely changed the way we communicate. And, I watched it over the years with engineers that they don't talk to each other, and they'll be sitting beside each other and they're IMing each other.
Right.
They're in an argument about something.
Exactly.
Instead of going and picking up a whiteboard pen.
Right.
And then COVID made that even worse.
Oh my
God. I feel sometimes a little responsible that we didn't think all that through. It was all about money. It was about making a lot of money.
Right.
Private equity wanted to make a lot of, and I mean, $8 billion deal was a big, that 2010 was a huge deal. And then I think 5 years later they did WhatsApp at 19B.
Right.
But 8B was a lot. And, but I also wonder whether Microsoft because Skype was a European company, the scuttlebutt was that, Microsoft had a whole bunch of cash in Europe in euros, and in order to, if they would bring it to the United States, they'd be paying a ton of corporate tax on it. So it's like, what better way? Let's just buy a huge. Yeah. Well, we weren't that huge. I think we had like 1,600 people at the time.
That's pretty sizable.
But we also partied, like, no doubt. One of the cultural things at Skype, again, very similar to Sun, you were allowed to innovate. Yeah. You were allowed to kind of experiment, go off the reservation, and and we had, we encouraged the hackathons. Yeah. But we had a lot of fun too, because in the beginning they used to take the whole company to once a year big party, and it used to be 50, 60 people in Palo Alto. That's and awesome. They had a kind of old school Silicon Valley parties where everybody ended up in the pool with their clothes on and stuff. But, and then the last one we went to was in Prague, and there was 1,200 of us. Wow. So we also had a lot of fun.
Exciting time. Yeah. That's awesome.
We made room. And I think that's what's important for leadership too, is to make room for fun. Make room for fun as well. Now, but I do feel that the just learning from history and instant messaging, mobile, social media, for profit is kind of an early warning sign for AI that I'm a little worried about.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that AI is bringing near-term job loss to the engineering ranks? Like, is that going to be a thing this year in 2025?
I've played around with coding with it. It's not always right.
Yes,
so it's not. It's pretty good, but it's not always right.
Right.
Even in if you just use it and play around with it to write, emails and whatever, it's not always right. And that's what is a little bit concerning. It's a tiny bit concerning. I don't know if did you hear? I don't know if it's appropriate, but Seinfeld did a 2023 commencement address at Duke University. And he quoted something. He goes that we're smart enough to invent it, we're dumb enough to need it, and that we're so stupid we can't figure out if we did the right thing. Right. And I'm worried about the latter. Right. I'm worried about the latter is that, and we're at a point now that if we don't keep up, the Chinese will do it.
Absolutely. No question.
And so it's a very, very difficult problem. So to answer your question about, job loss, I went through automation, in my career as a manufacturing system engineer. Everybody was like, oh, I'm going to lose my job. You do different things. You learn different skills. And I think that, you wanted to talk a tiny bit about hiring and retention and what's different. And I think, you have to create an environment that people want to come and work, and new skills are part of it.
Yeah.
And again, we go back to, giving room to experiment. And part of experimentation is learning new things. Like I wouldn't be where I am if Sun didn't let me play around with mobile.
Exactly.
I wouldn't,
Do you think that, if the AI tools for coding, QA, and so forth get very, very good over the next couple of years, do you think that whether it's AI agents coding or people coding or combinations of both, do you think we can achieve this world where we're starting to build perfect software, where there's no bugs in the software, it gets built at 1/10 the speed, it costs 1/10 the cost, or not 1/10 the speed, but 10 times faster and 1/10 the cost? Is perfect software possible with AI in let's say 3 years?
That's a tough one, because if you look at, automation is take the mundane, easy stuff, automate it. You go away, you can do other more, the whole adage about knowledge workers, right? And that you turn into a knowledge worker. I think we're seeing there's a lot of inefficiencies in the easy stuff. Websites, e-commerce, those I think will be disintermediated, 100%.
Yeah.
100% will be disintermediated. So it's like, what is the easiest, where the least amount of human intervention is required, and it's so repeatable. It's so repeatable that it can be done, efficiently. And there's enough data for the algorithms to study. Yeah. Because there's so much of it. Yeah. The beyond is I still think that human intervention, and again, I'm a little bruised from maybe we should have been around a lot more with messaging and mobile and rather than just the money piece of it, what Tristan Harris, he's the founder of the Center for Humane Technology. And he has a podcast that he talks about the effects of AI and effects of technology on how our society is going to evolve. But I think it's possible for certain areas that are they're the repetitive, mundane things. Yeah. Now, will it invent stuff? I think absolutely. It will improve areas
Will it be
around
the
cyber.
right stuff?
It'll improve areas around cyber on both sides, both hackers and not. I do think it's another evolution of our of computer science.
Yeah.
But it's been around a very, very long time. I wrote a blog about, what's all the hoopla. And I mean, in the 80s, we were doing ML. I mean, not me, but, the industry. And I just think, computation, until you get the computational performance and the amount of data, like now we're sucking in so much data. Yeah. Because, we let Alexa listen, we let everything listen to our stuff. There's just so much data, and the more data you have and the more computational capability you have, it's going to just accelerate. Right. And then the other thing that I talk about in that blog is that what makes it different is that it's been democratized and it's accessible. It was, my first ML project was very hard. Like make your brain hurt hard. And now it's the tools are just making it a lot more accessible to everyone.
I mean, I remember managing an ML team for the first time in 2017 and data science, machine learning. And from 2017 till today, it's like night and day. All those tools we used to use back, it's just all been reduced in terms of difficulty of getting those tools to work. It's so much easier. Yes. You can make all those models we were making in like a day versus like a month. I mean, it's kind of crazy what's happened with data science too, not just like large learning models. Here's a kind of a esoteric type of question, but the appetite for software in the world has just been going up since software was invented. Somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, Bobby, the appetite for software is going to plateau, and it's the appetite for content that is now exploding at another level. So your YouTubes and TikToks and Snapchats and all that type of stuff." In your opinion, being a CTO, being a tech person, does the appetite for software start to plateau? Because consider this, you have an AI agent that can kind of do anything. So maybe B2B SaaS is dying. You just have agents and they can do anything. You're not writing software anymore. You're just talking to something. And, and whatever interface you feel like, chat or visual or whatever. And then that gives way to just content creation and content consumption. What do you think about that?
So there's already companies. I'm trying to think of the name. I was that they're not using Salesforce anymore. They're like, no, we're not going to use it anymore. Gone. See ya. Right. So it's already starting. So in the next 10 years, do I see that happening? Probably not, because I think the appetite for software, what is kind of messed with our hiring scenarios a little bit, why it's a hot topic, like you said, was that there's just all these non-technical companies that are trying to catch up. So I don't see the appetite for software going away. Okay. Because it's not just, we always kind of put on the pedestal the Google, the Facebook, the big ones that are moving the needle at the pointy end. Right? There's still this big fat end that all these other companies that weren't traditional technology companies, like look at CVS. I don't know if their app is quite good. CVS? And I mean, they're a drugstore. Yeah. Right. Right. And while they're somebody would argue with me. They are a healthcare company. Yeah. They're a healthcare company, but traditionally they're not a technology company. Look at American Express. When I joined 5 or 6 years prior to that, they were not a technology company. So there's all these non-technology companies that are entering the space that need people. And whether it's a mix of AI and people to write code, but they still need, because they're non-technical people or non-technical companies, they still need the support of engineers. Yeah. But the pointy end will be concentrating on the content, which they're doing already.
Yeah. What happens though when I believe that. What happens when all this technical innovation and AI starts to meet the average slow North American or European company? Most companies are slow. So AI technical innovation is going at light speed. Meanwhile, company adoption is going at very slow speed. They're selling first gear. They're like, let's let other people be the guinea pigs. We'll see. And so,
yes.
So in 2 years, AI gets twice as better as it is right now, let's say, but you still have to account for the companies who are adopting it and how slow they move. You were mentioning banks, for example, very slow moving, hospitals, very slow moving, educational institutes, government institutes. These huge organizations, they move so slow, it almost doesn't matter how good AI is.
Yeah.
In one philosophy. Another philosophy, when I talk to my friends in Silicon Valley who are into AI, who work in these companies like OpenAI, they say that this technology is so revolutionary that the past cycles and maturity cycles are irrelevant, and it's going to topple everything over because of its power. What should we think about that?
Well, we've always had that. We've had the bleeding edge early adopters, and we've had the people that hung out and watched what would happen, and then you have the followers. I forget the exact terminology for those three, but we've always had that with whatever technology shift there's been. There's always been the early adopters, and the early adopters are forging ahead. And again, with the way social media is, sometimes the top 5% gets all the air in the room, gets all the oxygen in the room, and it gets, so I think there's space for everybody. I think it's a cycle. I think there's the really pointy end that are the bleeding edge early adopters, and the learning should be as those on the bleeding edge should be the social responsibility for the follower, like the followers that are coming afterwards, because otherwise we're kind of hosed. So I think it's a cycle. I think you're always going to have the people that are early adopters, and it's just everything is happening so much faster for us. Yeah, it feels like after COVID that we've been in a time warp.
Oh, hell yeah. In so many different ways. It still sometimes feel like we're stuck in COVID, right? It's just sometimes once in a while you're like, wait a second, it's over, it's finished, right? But yeah, I feel like let's maybe talk a little about the social, the responsibility side of things. These companies like OpenAI or Google or Claude and so forth, it's their packed with engineers, and they are focused on technical innovation. I find it surprising that so much of the world expects them to be so responsible for the implications of AI. Engineers have been building amazing things since forever, and it's really up to society at large and various institutions to deal with the implications of that technology. Don't you think? Or do you feel like, no, Sam Altman has a responsibility and stuff? I don't know if he does.
It is a little, if you think about what I don't like what's happened in the last year, and actually Tristan Harris talks about this, is that OpenAI had two sides. They had a nonprofit side and they had the for-profit side. And there was a clear division. And then that whole drama with firing Sam and whatever, because he wanted to, I think he, if I understood it correctly, he wanted to get rid of the firewall or whatever. But the first yellow warning sign is the profit. So if you blur the line between profit and non-profit, then it's just going to be a runaway train. But I think that train has left the station because China's going to beat us to it. 100% beat us to it. So that is one thing, to seriously think about. And then, so I think that is what worries me the most, is that there was separation. There was this sense of responsibility, to companies, and now that's gone. And the other area the other area is around the profitability. The profitability about getting rid of that border. That's what concerns me the most. Is getting rid of that. And there's no responsibility, and it's a little late. And then Tristan will go on to talk about connecting AI to the internet. It's like, for the longest time, I don't even know. I think Claude is now connected, but it wasn't 6 months ago. It was not connected to the internet.
Okay.
So because if you ask Claude to do anything, it would be like, I'm sorry, I don't have access to the internet, so my information. But those are the two areas that he talks about, and I buy into those. That if we're gonna dial it back and dial it down, then connecting it to the internet is kind of a runaway train.
Yeah.
And profit.
It's clearly there's a huge risk to AI, especially as it gets smarter and smarter and smarter. Do you think that we're close to AGI in whichever way you think about AGI, or do you feel like there's a bunch of AI researchers who are like, well, in this definition over here, we're like 20 years away from this, 10 years away from this thing, but pretend make-believe AGI maybe is here next year. What do you think?
I think people are going to experiment with it, but they're not going to. I think it's 15 to 20.
Yeah, the way we think about it in the Star Trek kind of way. That's clearly not in the next 2 years.
Yes.
But
I do have kind of a tiny funny story. The cyclist that I was dating, his son almost, in Europe, you get free college, but you have to make it through certain schools. And if you fail, you go to the next school. If you fail, you go to the next one. If you fail the third one, you're basically blue collar the rest of your life. So he was in that category. And, along came me and he saw what, if you worked hard, what you could get. He saw the effects of Skype. He liked that piece of it. He didn't like the UI. He was very vocal about the UI. So he passed, the Last Chance Motel. He ended up going but he couldn't get into user experience design. Okay. And he asked me what he should do. And I said robotics. And he has his PhD today in robotics. Oh, wow. The guy who almost failed high school has a PhD in robotics. And he's the guy actually, that could answer all those questions.
Sounds like a smart kid.
Yeah.
I mean,
I tell you, I would never have guessed it.
Not when he was in high school. But it seems like there's some super intelligence. Who knows the exact definition of that? But it's capable. It's risky because it's capable of doing some pretty bad things, especially as you said, if it's connected to the internet, if it has access to networks and systems, then it's a little scary. But I feel like my personal opinion, I feel like they're putting it too much on the engineers of the world. There need to be other entities involved, and there are, but they're slow moving with regulations and things like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about a couple more things, and then we'll wrap up. We have a lot of CTOs in the audience or VPs of engineering trying to be CTOs. Can you give some advice on making the jump from leading a couple of teams to being the sole top leader of all of technology in a company? Maybe it's a $100 million company and it's got 150 engineers or something like that. So not huge. But can you give people some advice on how do you make that leap?
Mm-hmm. I think it's the additive about, how should I say it? Leading through others. And part of leading through others is being able to create the journey and create the path. So create the vision, develop the agenda, develop the fellowship. And part of developing the fellowship is selling your ideas. We're back to this stuff, managing stakeholders. So you have to start looking up and out, not down.
Right.
And the leap is that, I talked about this a little bit earlier too, is that the great engineering folks that we have, and we have more of them now than we ever had, because 15 years ago, I was an anomaly 15, 20 years ago. I'm not an anomaly anymore. But they're really good technology wise, but they can't do everything. They have to learn how to lead through others and learn how to develop fellowship, develop the vision, and develop fellowship and influence. And influencing is not a first posture for engineers.
No.
Most engineers are introverted.
Right.
And influencing requires, I often say that I kind of know what Mick Jagger feels like, because imagine singing the same song over and over again for 60 years.
Right.
Right? Like when you're trying to bring an entire organization along with you, you've got a song, you've got your vision, you've got your agenda, and you've got your selling points on why this is great, but you are communicating that at multiple touch points.
Right.
So you have to be ready to do that. So managing up and out, embracing the entire culture and the business acumen. You have to know the business. And, I go back to like my finance for non-financial, people. You have to know finance. But I think the most important thing is the up and out versus the down. And there's also this saying about green and blue zones, is that green zones are strategic areas and blue zones are tactical. Tactical and performance related is a little bit like dopamine. You check that list. I did this. I met the KPI. So it makes you feel good. The green zone is managing through ambiguity and creating an environment, creating a plan and an agenda that will pull people through that ambiguity. Yeah. Because your life becomes all about ambiguity and uncertainty and change. And if you're not comfortable with that, then you won't make the leap. I mean, those are kind of the things that I think about on what, if all the discussions we've talked about so far in the last hour or so is Skype put me in with all these stakeholders. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was having to manage up and out. At the same time, I'm still managing technical problems. And at the other, the third area is because I'm managing all these stakeholders, I have to create this safe, stable place for my engineers to work and shield them from the ambiguity so that they can work. So I think that those are my, kind of advice. Becoming more versed in a technology and becoming an expert in AI, sure, it's going to help you with, when you go out for dinner, but to lead the team and, to work for a CEO and lead an entire technology strategy, you're going to have to become strategic and find a balance between the blue and the green. So the strategy and the performance, so that, the performance stuff helps you with your engineers, confidence, they're happy, they're getting recognized. It also helps you a little bit on the upside, but the strategic aspect is super important. So I would say the up and out and stakeholder management and being able to create that agenda and develop fellowship and get out of the performance blue zone and spend more time in the green zone. And a lot of people are more comfortable in the blue. So
they are. Where can people find us? Where can people find your blog?
My blog is on LinkedIn. I just use LinkedIn for
That's
my
perfect.
blogs. Yes,
Yeah, we'll
and
post
my book is in edit. I need to kind of practice procrastination is not good, but I've been procrastinating a little bit with it.
What's it about? What's it about, your book?
It's called The Framework to Go Faster, the 2 G's of being a CTO. So good to great, how you go from being a good CTO to a great CTO. And how do you embrace the workplace culture to build this responsible, autonomous, and accountable culture? And it has to do with...
That's amazing. I want to read that.
The main theme is most teams that I walk into that are not, quote unquote, high performing or slow, they don't have strategy and execution, they're too far apart. So it's not in focus. The strategy is not in focus. So as a leader, you bring the strategy in focus, and it's about how you do that. And under strategy, you can bump, for lack of a better word, people, process, technology, and you look for small incremental improvements and continuous improvements. So sometimes it's as simple as, changing the organization, removing people that, a lot of people don't have the courage to do. That lifts the team. Creating a data-driven environment, putting pressure on product to you have to come with your stories done. Giving engineers the opportunity to say no. And then, on the execution side, you create burning imperatives, create milestones, celebrate your early wins, wrap it in data, rinse and repeat. And over time, engineers, you build confidence in the organization, and you go faster. And I proved that in small 30-person companies. Skype was a good proving ground. I had 400 people. Amex was 600. So it's kind of, I proved it in all different big and small scenarios.
Well, when it comes out, let me know. I'd love to promote it.
Oh, I'd love that. Thank you so much. This has been fun.
I love reading stuff like that. Okay, I think we're at the end of our time. It was a pleasure talking with you today, Gabriella.
Very nice to participate as well. And thank you again for the invitation.
Absolutely. I always learn so much talking to you. And I'm sure our listeners will have taken a lot from this discussion. Thank you to everybody for joining. And I'll see you next time on the Technocratic podcast. In the meantime, keep the sharks swimming.